In February 2024, Vladimir Putin asked a journalist for a, quote, 30-second or 1-minute historical detour. That detour turned into a sprawling monologue. The core premise he pushed was that the modern Russian state has an unbroken, continuous lineage starting in the year 862, when a prince named Rurik was supposedly invited to rule the city of Novgorod. For most people watching outside of Eastern Europe, 9th century Slavic history is a blank slate. Without the background context, it is incredibly easy to just nod along and accept this massive chronological leap as established fact. But this specific year, 862, is the literal foundation Moscow uses to argue that Ukrainians and Russians are one people. It is the historical anchor they deploy to erase Ukrainian identity and justify a brutal, ongoing war of conquest. By pulling data from modern archaeology and Western European archives, we can trace exactly where Rurik came from and where he actually went. The dictator's primary justification for war is built on a timeline that simply does not exist. Let's look at the physical geography of Putin's story. The claim relies entirely on Rurik arriving in the northern city of Novgorod in the year 862. This chart maps out the dendrochronology of the oldest excavated wooden layers in Novgorod. The data shows no settlement existing there in the 9th century. The earliest wooden streets date to the mid-10th century, decades after Rurik's death. If Rurik went to a Novgorod, historical evidence points much further south. He likely traveled down the western river routes toward places like Novgorod-Siversky, an established center in modern Ukraine, entirely bypassing the cold northern swamps of modern-day Russia. To physically anchor their imperial origin story, later Moscow rulers retroactively assigned the 862 legend to Veliki Novgorod, building grand monuments to cement a fabricated history into the public memory. The very city claimed as the cradle of the Russian state was a patch of wilderness when the founding events supposedly took place. The imperial timeline collapses before it even begins. If the location is wrong, we have to ask who the historical Rurik actually was and where he came from. Frankish and Danish chronicles from the 9th century document a man named Rurik of Jutland. He was a powerful Viking ruler from the Baltic coast, deeply tied to the Carolingian Empire in Western Europe, and he even held lands in the modern-day Netherlands. This diagram tracks early Christian vocabulary in the Ukrainian language. Words like tserkva and krest trace straight back to Germanic and Latin roots, bypassing Byzantine Greek terms. This proves early Christian contact flowed from Western Europe, long predating the 988 baptism. Sailing down the expansive river systems of Eastern Europe in shallow draft ships, Rurik and his retinue eventually made their way south into a completely different political landscape. Moscow claims Rurik arrived in the north to build civilization from scratch, but when his descendants reached the southern Dnieper River, they found Kyiv. Founded centuries earlier by the Polyanian people, Kyiv was already a sophisticated capital, trading actively with global powers. The arriving Viking princes did not conjure a state out of thin air. They simply integrated their military power and dynasty into the ancient, thriving heartland of Ukraine, forging the mighty Kyivan Rus Empire. If the Moscow state is not the direct heir to Rurik or the ancient Kievan Empire, where did its political lineage actually begin? While Kiev was trading with emperors in Constantinople, the territory that would become Moscow was a heavily forested, remote frontier. It was inhabited by Finno-Ugric tribes and remained far outside the borders of European civilization for centuries. Moscow only truly gained prominence in the 13th and 14th centuries by serving as tax collectors for the invading Golden Horde. Its rulers adopted the absolute, despotic governing style of their overlords, building a political culture entirely alien to the free cities of European Rus. When this rising Moscow state finally expanded northward, it crashed head-on into the actual descendants of early Rus, the Republic of Novgorod. Novgorod was a wealthy European trading hub governed by a parliament, operating on democratic principles directly opposed to Moscow's autocracy. Ivan's forces systematically dismantled the last remnants of the Free Rus tradition. The 1570 massacre successfully replaced the Republic's democratic institutions with absolute Muscovite control. Moscow entered the ancient Rus territories through military annexation. By liquidating the Novgorod elite, the Tsars functioned as military occupiers. breaking the political continuity of the original Rurikid lineage. Correcting the Rurikid timeline serves as a vital act of intellectual self-defense. It exposes how historical identity theft is used to justify the modern erasure of the Ukrainian state.